would like first to welcome everybody, also the translators. I hope I will talk not too fast. And I would like to invite the participants if there's any pressing questions from the left from yesterday. If not, I can proceed with the presentation number 8, which is stakeholder engagement, public and workers' safety. I don't see any questions coming. Okay, now if there are questions, put them in the chat, and at the end of the presentation, we can still have time to answer your question. Okay, this is model 7 from the guidance, and I start the presentation with, again, the table of content of model 7, and then I will discuss the stakeholder engagement, safety and waste storage, why we have to involve stakeholders is being addressed, then the roles of non-governmental organizations and stakeholders. I give some examples. Then I give the rules that count for international financing organizations demand elaborated stakeholders involvement, and then what kind of stakeholders involvement do we need, and then some conclusive remarks. Stakeholder involvement is in all phases important. So it's not just important in the remediation phase, but in all phases. From the very beginning, you have to involve stakeholders. Now, the table of content of Model 7 is an introduction, of course. The importance of open access to information is being discussed in section number 2. Section number 3, guidance for site-specific stakeholder engagement. So we talk about engagement, stakeholder engagement planning, the implementation, the evaluation, and the duty of care and social responsibility. And we discuss risk register. So the importance of having a risk management, or the importance of risk management in such project. And to manage risk, we use a risk register. And that is discussed in the last section of paragraph 3. Then we come to 4. It's information, training, and supervision. We discuss this, the importance of training, monitoring and supervision, and air monitoring as a special subject. Section number 5, storage and transport of POP waste and POPs contaminated sites, POPs contaminated soil. And we discuss the interim storage of both, which is important because it's for most of the time for a longer period, and it involves risks. And then in section 6, we highlights of health and safety issues are being discussed. And this model also ends with references that can be consulted to get more information on the subject. Stakeholder engagement, safety and waste storage. Stakeholder engagement, including public engagement, is a key aspect of managing POPs contaminated sites. A key issue is early engagement with the local community, as they may be able to contribute historical information about the site, locations of potential hotspots on-site, and related dumping locations off-site requiring investigation. So that's why it's important to involve people, because they can help you by identifying hotspots, sources, which they know because they were working there, or they were living there, or they have seen things. So it's important to engage in an early phase to have an effective site investigation. The stakeholders, they have maybe more information than you can get from the guys. Now, Model 7 provides guidance on planning, implementation, and evaluation of public consultations so that it contributes to making a safer and more effective management and remediations of the site. So meaning here that if you have the information from the stakeholders, and stakeholders are people living around, official agency giving permits and so on, then they may tell you things which you have to take care of. For instance, with a service line of electricity, you need to consult the stakeholder, the owner of such subservice infrastructure. You need to consult him and ask him, do you have here water piping, electricity, data cables, or whatever? Then most contaminated site investigation and remediation plans cover aspects of workers' health and safety, but omit safety measures and emergency response that are important for the local community. Such measures need to consider potential releases of contaminated dust and fumes, contaminated rainwater and erosion, emission from remedial technology, and other potential hazards that impact the community. And Model 7 includes consideration of these issues. So in most projects, care is taken of the workers that are on site. But don't forget also that there is a health and safety issues for the people living around. A good example is, for instance, if you have a site where you decide to dig and dump, meaning you start excavating soil, you have more intensive traffic. So more intensive traffic with trucks means that you have to look at the situation on the road and inform people living around that there is a more intensive traffic of trucks to avoid or to minimize the risk of getting accidents. Then we come to the last part, safe interim storage of POPs waste and contaminated soil and sediments. That's also covered in Model 7, as it is an important aspect of both worker safety and protection of fence-lined communities. So if you decide to make a storage for contaminated soil or sediments or POP waste, you need to consider the safety of the people, again, living outside the fence of that storage facility. And that is discussed also in Module 7. Now, why involve stakeholders? There is a need to work effective and avoid controversy. So if you involve stakeholders, your work will be more effective and you avoid discussions because you allow stakeholders to already provide input. People living close to the site are the most vulnerable. So people living close to the site, they are affected by the fact that there is a contaminated site. So you have to involve them. Awareness raising among stakeholders reduce risks because they will inform you about all kinds of things which you might not know. So it helps to avoid mistakes, accidents, and protest. If you involve them in an early stage and you inform them about the plans and you take care of their comments and their suggestions and you discuss that and you raise the awareness, then you avoid protest. And that means that you have a project which will be implemented without trouble. And last but not least, awareness raising and protection of group at risk are agreed obligations under the Stockholm Convention. So if you are a member of the Stockholm Convention, so you have to involve stakeholders and you have to consult them and take them into account as an obligation from the Stockholm Convention. Roles of non-governmental organizations, also known as NGOs, and the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, are of course also stakeholders. But the roles of NGOs are nature conservation started at the beginning of the 20th century due to NGOs involvement, due to the awareness raising of the public and NGOs activities. Mass demonstrations against wrong political decisions of authorities are often initiated by NGOs, and often in the end politicians change their decision after protest. After mass protests, they change decisions because that is of influence. And this is often also initiated and facilitated by NGOs. NGOs are also religious and social welfare groups, and they work together to help disadvantaged groups. And religious, the mosque, social welfare, women groups, they all help to help the disadvantaged group. And disadvantaged group are, for instance, the people living around the contaminated sites. Now, workers' union to defend workers' rights and social justice. Also here, working on a contaminated site could be, let's say, affect the workers, and then the workers' unions have to step in. Sports and culture organization for education and development, yes, also they play a role in the awareness raising, and they might be consulted for steps to be taken. In general, where the government fails, NGOs step in. Now, here are some examples. On the left-hand side at the bottom, this guy is called Bojan Slate. He's a Dutch guy, and he started the ocean cleanup. And it's nice to tell you that he was a school kid and making a project on plastic soup. And that was, let's say, very much appreciated. He won a prize with it. And then after he finished his school, he decided to form his own company. So he's a very young guy and started his own company, but just from the awareness raised on plastic soup, he decided it. Now, we all know Greenpeace, which is also a large NGO. I would not call it anymore NGO, but a multinational. Then we have Extinction Rebellion, a lot of protests in our country against the use of oil products. And a good example of an organization that is now initiated by Greta Thunberg, the Swedish climate and political activist. Dutch examples of the roles of NGOs. Natural conservation organizations own and manage 10% of the Dutch territory, so 10% is owned by NGOs related to natural conservation organizations. 20% of the Dutch population is private sponsor of these natural and environmental NGOs. The nuclear power policy in the Netherlands changed because of massive protests and the Chernobyl accident, but nowadays changes to the opposite due to the energy transition. 44% of Dutch adults is engaged in voluntary work. Most men in sport organizations, most women in social sphere. Memberships of NGO is now declining because of change of political climate, fear of consequences, and the individualism and economic crisis play a role in the decline of the NGOs. So I think it's a pity, because the more NGOs they have, the more, let's say, views on certain issues, and the better you can influence political decisions. So it doesn't look important, but it is, because we are the people, and the people should organize and try to, besides other issues, try to influence the political decision on the positive side. Now we come to projects and the financing. International finance organizations demand well-elaborated stakeholder involvement, like the Stockholm Convention. It's an obligation, but financing it, like the IMF, is having 8 performance standards. And together with these 8 performance standards, the client is to meet throughout the life cycle of, to get these 8 standards should be maintained during the whole life cycle of the project. And the 8 standards are: assessment and management of environmental and social risk and impact. You have to take care of labor and working conditions, resource efficiency and pollution prevention, community health and safety and security, land acquisition and involuntary resettlement, biodiversity conservation and sustainable management of living natural resources, indigenous people, and cultural heritage. So these 8 aspects should be taken into account when you have a project that is financed by the IMF. You see here the link, and there are the document with the standards. You can consult it and get more information on these 8 standards. Now, normally I have a classroom training, and then we discuss what stakeholders you have, but that's not possible. I will not do that. Involvement of stakeholders are at national, provincial, and local level. Now, politician, provincial and local authorities, ministries, their department at provincial and local level, private landowners, representative of business and sectors, NGOs, farmers, and groups at risk. So these are more or less in the stakeholders of a project, and of course they can be detailed. So if you start a project, a stakeholders inventory should be made to see what groups you have to consult and inform. Okay, conclusive remarks. In general, stakeholders are well informed about obsolete and POPs pesticides, contaminated sites. There is, however, a lack of information on how to avoid risk among people living close to obsolete and POPs pesticide contaminated sites. So generally they are informed, but to avoid risks, that's another thing. There is a lack of safety measures in order to protect different groups against negative impact of obsolete and POPs pesticide contaminated sites. So these sites are there, but they're not fenced, they're not, let's say, they're not having signs that they should not be used or entered. But it does not hold true for staff and workers who investigate and remediate these sites. So when project starts, then the workers and the staff doing this work, they are protected. But often the groups around are not protected. Now, question: is there any active interest among the most important groups at risk in the country to solve the problems around pesticide contaminated sites? That's a question, but okay, I will normally then we have a discussion, but I will leave this. But it's good to make an inventory for other groups that are involved. So this was a short presentation on stakeholders involvement. Are there any questions on stakeholder involvement? It's a completely different subject. It's not technically, it's socially, but it is important. If you don't have the support of your stakeholders, you will have a risk of having a project that is not successful. And if you do not involve stakeholders, You may miss the chance of getting a lot of site information which is necessary to carry out your remediation in a successful way. So are there questions? If not, I will continue to the next presentation.